So glad to have you today, Jessica. Jessica is awesome, just great energy and personality. And apart from that, she is also the founder and owner of Journey to Yourself. She helps people across all types of industries manage stress better and just take better care of themselves in general. There's a lot more credentials and history with Jessica that you can read on the website. But the important thing to know is that she is passionate about helping people live their best lives. And that oftentimes includes managing stress. So Jessica, we are so happy to have you here today to talk about something that like we were saying, it affects all of us, but oftentimes we don't talk about it or don't even know who to talk to about it. So for you, what are some just keynote thoughts you want us to know about stress management, especially in the contractor industry? And then we'll jump into our conversation.
Yeah, of course. So the first thing I always like to mention is what is stress in general. I think just having an understanding what the word actually means, because we do say it all the time. Today was stressful, my relationship stressful, work was stressful. We say it, but what does it actually mean? So do you mind if I just ask questions and stuff? Is that okay if I make it interactive that way, Edie?
Do what you got to do. Yeah.
So the way I try to break this down, you guys can, I think there's a chat box in Google Meet.
Yeah.
So however you want to respond, but the way I try to make you think about it is, anyone have kids in here? Kids. Yeah. Okay. So tonight you come home from work and you sit at the dinner room table and they go, okay, I have a project that's due tomorrow, which never happens. I know they're on top of their stuff. And they say, we have to define the word stress. So how would you tell your kids, 10-year-old, 11-year-old, 12-year-old, what the word stress means? How would you tell them?
Good question. I would say pressure not dealt with.
Ooh, right? Pressure, and it's not dealt with. A lot of times we avoid it, right?
Yeah.
But stress is a reaction to change. So it means that it's happening every day. On average, a day, we react to stress 50 times, 50 times a day. You react to stress 3 different ways. Physically, which is your body, headaches, migraines, eye twitching, psoriasis. No one has gray hair in here, I know. Right? All reactions to stress. But kind of what Johnny was saying, we avoid it. So we ignore it. My head always hurts. My back always bothers me. My stomach always bothers me. So I ignore it. Then we have the emotional reaction. Anxiety, anxious, anger, frustration, irritable. And again, it's like, oh, it's just one of those days. Sometimes I'm in that kind of mood. And then it's the behavior, right? Overeating, undereating, Amazon shopping, right? Like Johnny was saying, that avoidance. So maybe there's a project that's due, or there's a person I have to talk to, or a discussion I have to have, and I avoid it. That isolation, drinking, right? All these things that we end up doing as behavior, and they tend to be that avoidance part, right? So Edie, going back to your original question, that's the biggest thing I want people to understand is how you react, and knowing that it is an everyday thing, and not to be, saying in a negative way, saying, oh, life's horrible. It's just being aware on how you react, because how I react and how Edie reacts, how Chloe reacts, it's going to be different. And it's going to be different based on different stressors in our life.
That's interesting. And so, okay, typically it's just a you and me interview, but if anybody also wants to jump in, feel free at any point.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to mess that up. So sorry.
No. That was a me. Like, I'm like, oh, we should just open it up. It doesn't. Yeah. But I do. So you mentioned, okay, so are there different levels of stress, or perhaps it's different levels of our response? Because like you mentioned, the change. So, my daughter deciding that she doesn't want to wear this dress versus this dress, and we have a little tussle about it, and then she puts on that dress. I can see how that's a stressor, but it doesn't necessarily, I'm not gonna eat less breakfast because of it. Or so I guess help us understand if there's different levels, or what that looks like. Maybe just talk more about that.
No, I love that question. So basically what happens is they start to build up. So like you said, I have to fight with this dress. Just act like I'm piling something up, right? So it's the dress. It's there's no creamer for the coffee. It's that the internet's being really slow. It's that there's traffic. It's that I have to go to the gas station. It's all those little things that start to add up. And if that's added up every day, just think about you carrying all of that every single day, that gets heavy.
Yeah.
So like you said, I'm not going to not eat breakfast because my daughter is fighting with me over a dress. But over time, if every time I walk into that and getting ready in the morning, I'm like, oh my God, here we go. We're going to fight again. If every time I have a meeting, sorry, Johnny, I'm going to pick on you. Every time I have a meeting with Johnny, yeah, you just seem open to it. Every time I have a meeting with Johnny, I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to bring up that one thing again. Right. So it's the repetitiveness that we start to build up for. We start to build that resilience for, like, okay, I'm not going to let him bother me today, or start to break down because I don't want to argue. Right. So it's knowing your reactions and what that stressor is. So it's that building of the stressor.
Got it.
That turn into that chronic stressor.
Right.
Which is when we start to see becoming really sick, and we really start to see that depression, the anxiety. Then we really start to see those types of things in our life.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. So in the line of work that you do, are you oftentimes helping people not be as stressed, to build the resiliency against stress, or ways to manage their response to stress, or a mix of both? What is kind of your approach? I'm sure it varies person to person.
For sure. And the biggest thing that I try to do is just create that awareness. Again, knowing how I react and knowing what makes me react is going to be the first thing, because then I can know what I want to do with that afterwards, right? So maybe I'm realizing, again, we'll go back to Johnny, that every time I work with Johnny, I created a certain kind of feeling. I don't eat. I feel really rushed that day. I get an argument with my significant other every time, right? So creating that awareness around my stress and knowing how I react is really important. And then, so then following up on that is creating those habits. What makes the most sense for you? Because you might love meditation and that's great, but Chloe might say, I'm not doing meditation, right? So it's finding what works for you. So it's learning communication styles. I teach about communication. I teach about time management, right? I teach about what those are. And then if you want to do more, that's great. But creating that foundation is what's really important.
I love that, because I think that's so true. And that's like the beauty of coaching. I think that it's not about prescribing a prescription or anything like that. It's saying, let me make you aware, and you as a capable adult can figure out what you need to do, and I can provide resources along that way. And so I think that's really neat, and also very empowering, because knowledge is power, and the older I get, I definitely see that more and more. And any other questions? I can keep going. I just want to, if you guys want to jump in at this point, or wait.
I'm curious, like how like emotional intelligence kind of plays into this whole thing, how that can be developed, if not present.
Of course. So emotional intelligence is again going back to that awareness piece, right? And a lot of emotional intelligence is really creating those habits that you do every day to show up for yourself, right? So it's learning that, but again, it's going back to what works for you. Because I could tell, like, the rest of the hour, I could say, these are all the things that I've done to help me overcome burnout. These are all the things that I've done, but that doesn't mean anything to you because that doesn't work for you. So going back to that awareness and that emotional intelligence piece is knowing what works for you, right? Because again, what works this month might not work next month because it's a completely different stressor, but it has to go back to that awareness. And for us to even create that awareness is starting to make time for yourself and learning about you.
That's interesting. Like when I hear you speak, it just seems like balance, and having balance is kind of the key.
It is, but I mean, and then it's going back to life isn't 50-50. So what is balance, right? So it's not, I spend 50% of my time at work and 50% of the time in life, because that's not true, right? There's a big project coming up and we have to be on the job site, overtime and things like that. So I'm going to be more balanced at work right now, but it doesn't mean I'm not existent in my life. It just means it's a little bit less. When it's a slower season, I might be able to spend more time with my family and less time at work. So it's finding what that balance actually looks like. If I'm consistently for the year always at work and not with my family, then we have a conversation, right? So it's learning what that means for you.
What kind of strategies would you advise people to use to kind of help manage the stress, and create balance in their life?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things that I talk about, like I was saying earlier, in my workshops I do, or just in general with the one-on-one client work, one of the habits I really implement is communication. So when I think about communication, it's very much knowing what you want. So the first thing I tell people is avoid the words always and never, because the likelihood that Edie never listens to me or Edie's always too busy doing something else is not really likely. Does it feel consistent when I'm stressed and annoyed and irritable? For sure. But avoiding those words, because when I go, Edie, you never listen to me. You're always too busy. You never support the team project.
Right.
She's not going to become defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now we're going into that battle back and forth, calling each other names, and we're never going back to that problem. We're avoiding your favorite word, Johnny, right? Going back to that avoidance of not going, Edie, I just need you to do these 3 emails. Edie, I just need you to go check on this site. We don't say that. We say Edie's everything but that.
Mm-hmm.
So we avoid that conversation. And then every time I see Edie, I start to get tense again.
Right.
So the first thing I tell people is avoid those words always and never, because they're more likely to get us into those arguments than anything. And if you catch yourself, because we're all human, we have emotions. So if you catch yourself, the other thing I tell people is when I start to feel myself yelling at Edie, it's saying, okay, am I in this to win or resolve? Winning is, pulling things up from the past, calling her names. That's winning. Resolving is going, okay, what is the one thing I need from her right now? Right?
That's good. That's good relationship. General relationship advice. Yeah, that's good. Johnny, we have a follow-up question. I don't want to cut off if you were.
Well, no, I guess it just kind of brings more of a comment, but in my household, we're not allowed to blame. Blame is the way I explain to my daughters is blame is an emotion that's in the negative realm of emotions, right? It's not taking responsibility for your own actions and for yourself, and whether something happens to you or not, whether it's your fault or not, taking responsibility for that happening and acknowledging it is important. So blame is something that's just not allowed in my house, although it still happens, but I call it out.
But
it's a chance.
No, right. But it's working through it, right? I teach this stuff. I still fall into habits, right? It's just, we're human. We get emotion, things happen, right? But it's kind of like you said, it's that acknowledgement piece. So another habit, do you mind if I keep going, Edie?
Of course.
Yes, please.
Okay. Another habit that I talk about is acceptance. A lot of times when we think about acceptance, there's nothing I can do about it. But when you look at acceptance up in the dictionary, it means to acknowledge. So it's very much what, to Johnny's example, is I'm becoming aware that my child is using the blame game, right? So let's have this conversation. I'm acknowledging that, Edie, I'm just picking on you.
Yeah.
Edie comes to these meetings late. I acknowledge, right? I'm acknowledging. So it's that same thing again. What is the one thing I can do from this? I'm acknowledging I didn't get the promotion. I'm acknowledging that when I get home from work, I need 5 minutes to myself. I'm acknowledging these things. So it's the next part, becoming aware again.
Yeah, I have this. I wonder, what people can do to kind of practice, put these sort of things in practice. What kind of materials can people go over? It's obviously not something that just is a natural go-to solution. Every day we are bombarded by all sort of stimulus and stresses and I understand. Myself, I understand that you can't control everything in your lifestyle. The only thing that you have control of in this world is how you feel about it. And that's on you, right? So-and-so made me upset. Well, did they make you upset or do you feel upset? Because nobody can make you feel an emotion. That's an internal thing. And that's the only thing that you have control over. I'd like to know what kind of, this is the learned behavior. You're not just natural at it. What kind of materials or what kind of processes can people go through to kind of learn these behaviors and make them kind of an everyday thing?
Yeah, of course. So when I work with the client or, in just general, right? So I talk about, there's 5 habits. I only told you 2, but there's 5 habits that I go through. And basically what I do with that is remind people that stress is a reaction to change. So even though it's a good change, even though you're I'm going to work on communication, I'm going to work on mindfulness, I'm going to work whatever the case may be, whatever habit you pull with you, I always tell people to pick one. So I won't go too detailed, but communication, I talk about acceptance, your environment, mindfulness, and self-care. So my job is to say, okay, which one of these do you feel you want to work on? What is the one thing you're going to do? Because stress is a reaction to change. So it's just like working out in the gym. You're not going to go right to the, well, I couldn't go right to the gym and pick up 50 pounds. It's not going to happen. I have to work my way up. So telling them what is the one thing they want to work on. A lot of times my one-on-one clients are very much onto a routine. So maybe their sleeping is an issue. Okay, so what's your night routine look like? And how do we make it so it makes sense for you? Because I can, again, sit here and be like, this is everything I do before I go to bed. But it's not going to work for you. You have a different schedule. You have kids and things like that. So it's finding what makes the most sense for you, but it's also realistic to your schedule. Because just throwing something at you isn't going to work. It's going, okay, what do you do now? And what can we add on to that? So I know I'm kind of giving a general example, but it's really finding what you want next. So Johnny, do you mind if I pick on you again?
Please. It goes with the name, by the way. When you call Johnny, you get used to it.
So you can use, don't have to be too personal, but tell me an example of something that you feel you want to help with stress. If you said, I'm going to sign up with Jess, and there was, and you wanted to work on something, what would be the one stressor you're like, okay, this is something I want to work on?
Well, I guess it would almost be like with everybody I know. It's like the onset of tasks that you just can't seem to chip away, the ever, present thing to do.
Yeah.
That you can never get away from or never turn off from.
For sure. So there's a couple things I would do in this scenario. One is, what does your to-do list look like? Is it just like a big notepad and you're just writing everything down? Right? Because that doesn't make sense, because not everything's a priority. I can't do everything today. So how are we creating that time management sheet? How are we creating that priority list? So the way I usually talk about it is, President Eisenhower. So he was really known for delegating, right? I don't know if I have it. I can probably pull it up in a minute. I can send you a link for it. And basically he put things in 4 different categories. Things that were important, not important, urgent, not urgent, right? And what he started to realize was like what he can delegate. What doesn't have to be done today, right? So the example I usually try to use for this is, say we're going to build our bathroom this weekend. We're redoing our bathroom. Well, I can't just walk in there and start putting new tile. That's not how it works. There's steps along the way. So when you start to break down the baby steps, you're able to cross things off. And you're also able to realize what's the most important and what's realistic for me to get done today. And also, this is a lot hard for a lot of us too, is that delegation piece again. Am I able to say, Edie, can you do this part? Do you have time in your day to do this part of this project? Because there's a couple of things that happen. I have to give that to Edie and walk away. Me sitting over Edie's shoulder and watching her and say, no, I would do it this way. I would do it this way. Right? I'm not getting my work done. And all I'm doing is sitting with Edie and creating that tense relationship. So going back to your original question is breaking down your priority list to things that I can get done today. Today is Tuesday. It's 8:18 in the morning. This is, with all my meetings, with all my projects, these are absolutely the things I have to get done today. These are the things I can pass on. This is what I can get done tomorrow. And then there's ones, especially in the blue collar industry as well, ADHD is very prevalent, right? So setting that 20-minute timer. Because like you kind of mentioned earlier, John, you went down that rabbit hole. We can all go down that rabbit hole of researching, of just getting hyper-focused on some emails or getting hyper-focused on this piece of the project. So setting that 20-minute timer. Because then it's checking, okay, it's like 20 minutes went off. Okay. Am I still focused? Do I still need to work on this task? Can I go to the next task? Right? Did I answer your question? Sorry, I've rambled a little bit. Because it's kind of hard not to like, that's like a broad answer. But then if I was working with you, we can really pull it apart. Like, go through that sheet, things like that.
Well, if everybody had their own personal Jessica, I suppose.
But, prioritize I would say be the biggest piece on that. Yes.
And what are your thoughts of procrastination? Like what would you say is is the underlying sort of thing that kind of causes people to procrastinate issues, just to push them aside, like you were saying, just to hold everything off and not handle their pressures.
Avoidance, right? There's a couple of pieces to that. You're avoiding because you don't think you're going to be good at it, right? Oh, I'm not going to be the best at this, or I'm avoiding it because, like you said, with that pressure, like it could be avoiding paying a bill. Oh, this person that has a stack of everything in the one corner. Well, I'll just deal with it later. I'll just deal with it later, right? So there's that avoidance piece. It causes them stress, causes them discomfort, right? So you have a lot of that as well. So when it comes to something that you don't want to do, again, going back to it, what part of this project can I do? Just a piece of it. We're just breaking pieces down. If there's anything like the takeaway from today is taking things down by piece. We can't just start a whole new routine, right? So if I know this one project, working with this one specific client, I like to avoid. I don't like talking to them. I don't like doing the spreadsheet of it. I don't like doing whatever the case may be, breaking things down. Okay, what piece of this can I do today? So setting that 20-minute timer, or again, going back to that delegation piece. Who can I lean on? Who do I know that can support me in this? Does that make sense?
I like that.
Awesome.
Edie, if there's anything you had to ask.
Yeah. And you did this with Johnny, but I was hoping you could kind of walk us through maybe a client, anonymizing it as much as possible. I don't know, just to give us a better understanding of what it looks like to even work with a stress management coach. That's something I'm sure, well, I'm not going to say I'm sure none of us have likely done. So would love to just get an insight into that. And you did that a bit, but.
Yeah, of course. So I can tell you about a recent client. So recent client of mine, so I work with, like you said, I work with a variety of industries for sure. One of them, this is a nonprofit. They work with like trafficking children and things like that, right? So working with the employee, meeting with her, and she does a lot of self-care things. And I think this kind of pertains to a lot of us. We're like, I'm doing a lot of things, but I'm still feeling that overwhelmingness. And there's some things I still want to grow on. And so a lot of what we're doing with her is she has a great morning routine. She does all the journaling. She does the meditation, things like that. But a lot of times with clients in that realm, they don't have a lunch routine or they don't have a night routine. And so when I was talking to her about a night routine, again, she's like, oh, I want to do affirmations and I want to do journaling, and all these things are amazing. They're really great. They're great to talk about, but how do you implement them? So one of the projects that she was working on with her kids was creating affirmations. And so I said, while you're on that project, how can we add something for you during that project? So I'm just adding habits to stuff you're already doing. So now as she's creating affirmations for the kids, she is now doing the same thing for her. So in the midst of her already doing that, she's creating affirmations for herself. Also, it's that rabbit hole again. She was avoiding other projects. She was avoiding other things that she didn't want to do or that stressed her out, felt really overwhelmed. She felt like she wasn't qualified for. So again, setting that 20-minute of, oh, well, I'm working, right, as I'm in this rabbit hole, but setting that 20 minutes again. So we added habits to what she was already doing, and then we started setting 20-minute timers on what she was doing. That answer?
Yeah, I love that. I love the simplicity of it. It's not, but it's hard, but it's simple, right? I mean, if it was complex, people probably wouldn't do it. But I love that. I love especially the 20-minute timer because I was definitely, oh my gosh, I like doom scrolled for like 2 hours last night till like past midnight. And I'm an old lady. I do not stay up that late. And I was like, this is terrible. And I kept on scrolling. I think if I even just had a timer, it would have been enough to just break me out of that. 10 minutes go by, I get the timer, like, oh my gosh, like that would have helped tremendously. So I love that.
I can give an example for a group setting too, if you like.
Sure. Yeah.
So in the group setting, one of my workshops, I have a 6-series workshop, and one of them is focused on communication. And so I was at an electrical company, and I don't go, Edie, how does it make you feel? Chloe, how does it make you feel? It's, what makes you defensive? If Johnny knew blank about my job, he would understand what, right? So it's having those kind of conversations. So it's eventually, we're talking about feelings, but it's not how does it make you feel conversation. So we're just opening up differently. And one of the defenses was, I feel that they're not listening, right? Which is, we all feel that sometimes. Oh, I don't feel like my coworker's listening. I feel like they're talking down to me, things like that. So that was one of the things that the gentleman was getting defensive about. And he had said, well, I feel that when they're trying to explain something to me, they're talking down and not really giving me an explanation on how to do something. So he started to explain how he was teaching somebody on his team. And as he's going, oh yeah, when you do the figure 8, and an older gentleman from the other side says, what the blank is a figure 8? And as they're going back and forth, arguing on what it is, he's trying to describe the process. The older gentleman is saying, that's not what you believe in. Call it, right? We're going at it. So I pause them and I say to the older gentleman, what are you trying to describe? Well, the yin yang. It's called a yin yang. And I tell the younger gentleman, what are you trying to describe? Well, the figure 8, the figure 8. When we talk through the process, they were literally saying the same thing, but they were calling it 2 different things. And how often does that happen when, oh, the thing of a God, the thing with the thing, that thing. We're trying to say the same thing, but we're talking differently. Maybe we're calling a different term, and we get frustrated with each other. And so what I told them in that moment, we could have, if I didn't stop them, how long do you think this argument would have went on, right?
It never resolved.
Right. Yeah. And unresolved.
Yeah.
And I said, we talked a lot about, one of the things that the employees were talking about was time management. And I said, you just could have spent 20 minutes arguing over the same thing. And how could we do this differently? How much time was wasted, right? And we had that conversation. And then what happens in 10 minutes after the workshop? They're laughing, talking about it. Like, oh my gosh, do you remember when I didn't know what you're talking about, right? And realizing that they were saying the same thing.
Very fun. I like those questions that you asked at the beginning, because it can be a lot, depending on the group and stuff. I won't stereotype, but the stereotype is, guys typically have a harder time diving into that, and a lot of contractors are men. So, and that feels a lot less daunting. And I like the defensive question, because that's one that oftentimes is not just an emotion. You can feel that in your body, and it's an easier thing to identify. I love that. I'm going to steal that. That's a good question. But how powerful and important are these principles and these foundational things that, we consider softer skills, but are really the glue that holds together a group of people. It doesn't matter how technically proficient your team is. If one person's talking about the yin yang and one's talking about the figure 8, and they spend an hour and then they're mad and they still won't even come to a resolution. So I think it's really, really neat how you come in and help supercharge teams in this way.
Thank you. It's fun. Never a boring day.
I'm sure.